Welcome to God Friday Discussions. As we embark on this journey together, it's important to acknowledge the diversity of thoughts, beliefs, and experiences that each of us brings to the table. Our discussions are rooted in a spirit of exploration, learning, and mutual respect. The views expressed are those of the individual participants and are presented for the purpose of open dialogue and personal reflection. Please note, we recognize and honor the freedom of personal belief. This platform does not advocate for any singular viewpoint as the absolute authority on spiritual matters. Our discussions are intended as a safe space for sharing and growth. We encourage you to approach each session with an open heart and mind, but also respect your personal boundaries. If at any point you find the content not to your liking or comfort, you are free to disengage as you see fit. While we seek to provide enriching content, participation is entirely voluntary. We assume no responsibility for any personal decisions or interpretations made in response to our discussions. Our aim is to foster a community where curiosity, faith, and understanding can flourish. Thank you for joining us on this journey. And today's topic will be church and state. So let's get into it, and I'll get started with a prayer. O thou kind Lord, these are thy servants who have gathered in this meeting, have turned unto thy kingdom, and are in need of thy bestowal and blessing. O thou God, manifest and make evident the signs of thy oneness, which have been deposited in all the realities of life. Reveal and unfold the virtues which thou hast made latent and concealed in these human realities. O God, we are as plants, and thy bounty is as rain. Refresh and cause these plants to grow through thy bestowal. We are thy servants. Free us from the fetters of material existence. We are ignorant. Make us wise. We are dead. Make us alive. We are material. Endow us with spirit. We are deprived. Make us intimates of thy mysteries. We are needy. Enrich and bless us from thy boundless treasury. O God, resuscitate us. Give us sight. Give us hearing. Familiarize us with the mysteries of life, so that the secrets of thy kingdom may become revealed to us in this world of existence, and we may confess thy oneness. Every bestowal emanates from thee. Every benediction is thine. Thou art mighty. Thou art powerful. Thou art the giver, and thou art the ever bounteous. Abdul Baha.
All right, man. We got the band back.
How's it going? Yeah.
It's been a little journey the last few weeks, but it's going, man. How about you?
Yeah, same here, man. I've had it quite rough these last 2 weeks, but back on track now again. Yeah.
But yeah, we didn't get to get some wisdom from you the past few weeks, man. So uh, tonight, I think you definitely have something about church and state. So interested to hear your take, and
Oh, it's a
let's
very
dive
deep
into it.
topic.
Yeah, definitely.
So I think when we talk about the separation of church and state, we're primarily talking about secularism, you know, because it involves governance and secularism uh, founded off the back of like the French Revolution, and then also the founding fathers of America, Thomas Jefferson. These guys, they were secularists. I mean, they advocated for the separation of church and state. Um, One of the motivations behind that in Europe was because of the tyranny that people suffered under the Catholic Church historically, um, where people were largely kept illiterate. You know, only Bible scholars could read and write, and there was sort of paranoia, any ideas that were not sanctioned by the church. Because there was an increased interest in science, people who took towards science and medicine and rationality and philosophy and these things were all declared heretics, you know. Some of them were burnt at the stake. So it was like secularism did have a meaningful sort of impetus behind it, you know, from a European perspective. And it did sort of further the scientific world because now everything didn't have to be vetted by the church, you know, and it allowed for free inquiry and yeah, where we are today, basically. So that's just the background, you know. But obviously, as we exist today, we do see some drawbacks also on the other side of things. So I don't know if anyone wants to add to that sort of overview. Yeah.
Yeah, I think in addition, I think it's more complex than separation of church and state. I think you can't completely separate the two. So I think when we're talking about church and state, we're talking about, like you said, religion and secularism, right? Is pretty much what church and state are. So my opinion is, where does morality come from?
Hmm.
So these morals weren't just written on people's hearts. These morals weren't uh, something somebody thought up. These morals were derived biblically, in the state specifically. They were derived from biblical principles, even though our founding fathers did advocate for, not necessarily, I don't want to say secularism, they advocated for the right to, uh, what was it? Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, right?
Hmm.
Uh, and you had God given rights, and those rights were ordained by God, or they can't be taken away. So this advocation, I guess, for the separation of church and state, I think was flawed from the Declaration of Independence, speaking specifically here for the United States. I can't speak for obviously Europe and other countries.
So one
But
thing, Matt, I would like in my mind, um, the the Declaration of Independence saying that is more is still a it's God and state rather than church and state, because I think church implies like Christianity or a particular religion, but then but you're right, like our Declaration of Independence says, you know, all people are endowed by their creator to have inalienable rights. And so, yeah, it definitely is including God or, you know, our creator. And yeah, but I'd say maybe it's not church because it's not a religion.
well, so the word church is interesting, right?
Yeah.
Because when we use the word church and we use it in the text or the content that we understand it of today, it isn't the church that Christ actually created. So the word, I believe, was ecclesias, which was like a gathering or a like fellowship. It wasn't a building. It wasn't a hierarchy. It
Mm.
was a like a fellowship among. It was community basically, right? And that word church didn't come around until, don't quote me on it. This is after like the Luther reform. Uh, I believe the word was like kuriakos, and it was like a German word. And that's where we got our word church, which somebody could look that up. Kuriakos, I think is how you spell it. And I think that's where the physical part of it was. So understanding what actually church is to begin with, I think is important in the dialogue, because we have this perception that it's just this building with this hierarchy, that this person that you kind of are accountable to, which isn't the case in the original text. So, and I don't know where in the 1800s or 1700s, apology, specifically where the states were, where the founding fathers were with that concept. I believe it was still kind of original. Like church, you would go to somebody's house and you'd have fellowship. You'd break bread with them. You'd, uh, probably read Bible together. So, yeah, that's just a short background
But
on that
that's
as well.
Matthew. That's a Protestant way of viewing church. You got to understand historically that church, the Roman Catholic Church, was a political power, you know, and even a king, for example, had to be ordained by the Pope. Okay, and the king was subject to the Pope
Mm.
because the Pope represents Christendom. You couldn't go against the Pope. You know what I'm saying? Even when they wanted to fight a war, for example, it had to go via the Pope. You know, so
Yeah.
when when people talk about the separation of church and state, um, even against the backdrop of America, like according to the founding fathers, remember that these people ran away. These were Irish, Scottish men who escaped Britain. They escaped. They were running away from Europe to find their own, to start their own colony. I mean, that's why you had the Great War of Independence, etc. Right? So America is, I mean, if you look at its history, it's really a Protestant country. It's on Protestantism, a certain strain of Christianity in which church is viewed in a very different way to Catholicism. Because in
Yes.
Protestant sort of outlook, it's more egalitarian, it's less hierarchical, um, it's more sort of everyone should read the Bible themselves and locate themselves in the Bible. And, it's a different tradition. You understand what I'm saying? So when people view like the separation of church and state in the European context, in the Western context, you can't divorce America from the rest of Europe in that sense. They really mean, uh, they really are referring to the Catholic Church.
Oh,
Because
so
you
you're
see,
saying, can I touch in there? You're saying the founding fathers were kind of referring to the Catholic Church about.
yes,
I
because
follow what you're putting down here.
that's the history. That's the history they come from. That's the experience in Europe. So they didn't want a country where they were giving clergy the power over politicians. So, so the business of the state should be in the hands of statesmen, not clergy. You know, and it wasn't a sort of, at least for them, because most of them were anyway Christian and religious Christians. I mean, they read the Bible, they believed in it. Um, but they were not. Uh, they were non-sectarian. Another way of looking at secularism, in fact, another definition of it, is to be non-sectarian. So they may have wanted the overarching principles of Christianity to reflect in their political ideology, perhaps, right? And in some ways, it is reflecting in like the United States Constitution. There's elements of Christianity in there, right? But they didn't want to be under the thumb of a church or a clergy. I think that's really what the difference is. I mean, where it comes in.
Yeah. Um, that was a good job actually clarifying that. I guess the point I was making was mainly about the morality, right? I don't think it's completely possible to segregate church and state from what I define as church. Uh,
Mhm.
you have to have a source of where your morals come from, and United States, the moral code obviously came from the Bible. Uh, our founding fathers were Judeo Christians, and they did advocate for not using that verbiage,
Mhm.
but the laws, the principles that were created. were 100% derived from biblical principles. And that's not even an argument that's here or there. The complicated issue is, where do you draw the line, I guess, is my question. Uh,
Mhm.
yeah, where you say, well, you want church and state completely separate, well, then you end up in a society that's like in moral decay, which is what we see here in the States.
I think
So
it's
there's got to
I think sorry to interrupt.
go ahead, Raj.
I
No, go
think
ahead,
it's
Raj.
about governance. So like the church has a governance structure, and so they can make decisions on stuff because they do have a governance structure. And so the idea of separating church and state is to exclude the church's governance structure. But say in Britain's government, the church's governance structure is part of the entire governance structure. So um, yeah, I guess that the governance structure is the key thing for that.
Well, your brother did a good job of explaining that. Was what they were trying to separate was like the Catholicism from the government, not necessarily the church, like the Catholic Church. Uh, the point I was leading into, which isn't really relevant to the conversation, is the church that Jesus started was not the Catholic Church. Uh, the Catholic Church was kind of like a newer version, I'd say, of like Jewish temple. A lot of similarities there, you know. Um, like Jesus advocated for him being the cornerstone of the church and not these these statues, these relics, these, you know, we focus on none of those. It's like Jesus is the cornerstone of the church, and until like Luther had his reform, that we got away from what Jesus was saying, and then you had like these crusades and the, what do they call it, the what was the episode where the Catholics were just killing the people?
Inquisition.
The Inquisition, yeah. So like, yeah, he did a very good job of explaining it. Sometimes I just got to sit back and listen. He was leading into it, but when they were describing the separation of church and state, it was more along the lines. What he's implying is that they were advocating of getting rid of the Catholicism, not necessarily separating religion from the law, but the practices that the Catholics were facing, the power that the Catholics had, that the church was the absolute authority, you know, and we seen they seemingly, I wasn't alive, but they were taking advantage of people. You know, it became more of a political environment than it was a religious environment, and that's what the founding fathers in the United States were trying to avoid. Is what I gathered what he was explaining.
Yes, yes. Yes, and then, but now the important question you brought up is, where do you draw the line? You know, um, because the problem also we'll face, like for example, let's say we have a Christian country, okay, um, and in every religion you have sort of the fanatics, you know, you just have them, right? Just like if you had like an Islamic country, okay. The problem arises, and this is the problem that secularism also tries to address, is that when you have a Christian country or a Muslim country, how free are people from other religions in that country to practice their religion? What I'm saying, if the official religion of the country is Christianity, or non-Christians, right, or believers or non-believers, or people who don't even affiliate with anything, atheists or whatnot, are they free to be in that sort of Christian regime or Islamic regime? You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah,
And that's why the idea of secularism was to say that let us take um, religion out of the picture and say that our principle will be based on humanism. That we will not. There'll be freedom of religion as long as everyone upholds these basic rights and not impede the rights of other people, don't infringe on the rights of other people, it's all cool. We chill like with whoever. In principle, that's the idea. I mean, did it ever work really like that? I don't think so. But that's kind of the theory behind it, you know? So what do you guys think of that, like as a framework?
No, I agree almost 100% of everything you just said. Like it was like basic principles that obviously were more in the United States speaking only, but more than likely derived from Christianity, right? If you don't kill each other, don't cheat on your wife, don't, there were these basic laws that we kind of stepped away from because somebody said that uh, there's a new term I'm hearing there. That's the 18th century scripture, which I don't know what that means because I thought scripture just never changed, But
Mhm.
uh, so they came along with these new movements, the women's reproductive movement, the feminist movement, the sexual revolution, so we challenged these basic laws that were upheld for almost 2 centuries that kept this country intact, whether or not it was. I'm not advocating that our founding fathers. Me and Raj had this conversation. I'm not advocating our founding fathers were good people. I think they were geniuses, though, the way they wrote the Declaration of Independence in a manner that anybody could practice their religion as long as you uphold these laws here.
Mhm.
And all these laws, especially like in the Abrahamic religion, they apply to all three. You know, like these basic laws. If you don't break these, then
Mhm.
we don't have any issues. So what I see is that we've gotten away from those basic laws because I think that's just what we do as human beings. Like, the Bible suggests that, like, all throughout time, we're like a rebellious. People are just rebellious, where I don't know, they want to challenge. So,
Mhm.
I personally think you can't completely separate the two.
Mhm. Mhm. You see, the thing is, Matthew, like I first of all, just for the viewers out there, it's not that I'm advocating for secularism. I'm just explaining it. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just identifying where it comes from and why it has emerged on the world stage as an important counterbalance to the exploitation of religion, if I can put it that way, right? Is that religion tends to be the domain of clergy who tend to be very sectarian, who tend to be also very petty, and also because religion addresses a wide variety of issues outside of common governance or basic governance. Understand? For example, we would argue, being the products of secular nations, I'm a product of South Africa, which is a secular nation. You're the product of America, which is a secular nation. So, in our imagination, being products of secular nations, we wouldn't, for example, think that a religious ceremony involved in baptism or marriage, or in the case of Jews and Muslims, circumcision, and all these things should have anything to do with the government, right? In our imagination, we wouldn't think, why should that have anything to do with the government, right? But in a religious state, it does. You understand? And so it results in, because Christianity and Islam and Judaism and many religions deals with these very private affairs in your life,
Mm.
okay? It results in the government trying to micromanage your life right into your home. You get what I'm saying? Because the government
Yeah,
is the religion is the government. And
yeah,
it results in a type of totalitarianism and repression that in religious states, for a lot of people, is intolerable because they want the freedom. It doesn't mean they wanted the freedom to be irreligious. They just want the freedom also sometimes of interpretation, perhaps. or they want the freedom of to be able to question the religion or to debate it or to see it in a different way. You understand? But when there's an official state religion, like let's say Catholicism, well, then the next thing you know is that they're persecuting all the Protestants. You get what I'm saying? They're saying, well,
Yep.
all your church is faulty, right? We got to shut them down because we have an official Christianity. You get what I'm saying? So there's
Mm-hmm.
that problem. And that's why I'm not in favor of a government that is run by and or answerable to specifically to clergy. Because clergy have throughout the centuries been incredibly problematic and petty and sectarianism. And this is the reality of the situation. But I am in favor of a government looking at the overall principles of religion and using it as their guideline, as a guideline, but from the perspective of statehood, not from religion. So I advocate for a type of secularism, but a boundaried secularism, to say that, look, within the ambit of these boundaries, which are set by God, we acknowledge there are boundaries, right? But in the ambit of these boundaries, we are not going to micromanage anybody outside of them. It's just the like the Ten Commandments, for example, and not the faith things, for example. So you can't, for example, force people to believe in God. You can't make it a rule of the government, oh, everybody must believe in God. Because belief is a private matter. You either really believe in God or you really disbelieve in God. But that should be your right. You understand? To believe or not to believe. It should be your right. Okay? But just because you disbelieve in God, it doesn't mean that you should have the right to murder because God said, thou shalt not kill. So what I'm saying is that actionable laws should be enforced as law, but it should be enforced as law as if it were a secular state. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So we don't have to, for example, tell the murderer, oh, how dare you go against God's law that you should not kill. No, we should just say that the law is that you shall not kill. That's the law. Whether you believe it's God's law or not is irrelevant. That's the law. Whether you believe in God or not is private. You understand? And I think if we do that, we can have a nation under God that is still under God because it's within God's boundaries and have freedom of religion. Because you're not imposing the religion, but you recognizing that the religion does have laws that help a state or that makes a
Mm.
state. You understand? So that's kind of
Yeah.
where I balance. What do you think?
Yeah. I kind of I follow you. I follow you. Uh, I think I agree with you probably like 95% of the way. So the like when the founding fathers found this country, exactly what you said was how they founded it. There was no they weren't advocating for Christianity, they weren't advocating for Islam, they weren't advocating for, Judaism. Uh, they were advocating for these rights, these laws that probably fall with all three of these sects here,
Mhm.
and it's a greater good for the society. If we obey these laws, if we follow these laws first come from God, though. We need to understand that. These laws don't come from man.
Mhm,
So,
mhm.
because a man can change the law.
Yeah,
So
but
another
when
man can come
but
up.
the thing is that we understand that we
Yes.
believe in God.
Yes.
Understand? But it doesn't mean that someone who doesn't believe in God shouldn't be subjected to the same laws. Because
Oh.
the problem we face is that then what people do is, and I've seen this, they say, oh, that law is from your religion. So since I am not from your religion, I'm not obligated to follow it. You understand what I'm saying?
Well, so I'd ask this question: what basic laws like were constitutional
I
that I
think
would say,
it should be the laws. Like if you read, I don't know, is it Leviticus or the Old Testament sort of, the major laws are mentioned almost as a prescription, as a legal code. Okay, so there are major laws, for example, that everyone agrees on are bad for society, right? That are also mentioned in the Bible, mentioned in the Quran, for example, right? So these things should be like constitutional, as in they can't be overridden, overridden by anyone. 'Cause you'll hold that for God. You understand what I'm saying? And then the rest is all man-made because you need man-made laws. You need to know to ride on the right side or left side of the road, whether you stop on a green or
yeah, yeah,
you need laws to, and these laws need to be updated and evolved as technology and whatever. You need now, Elon Musk is advocating for legislation around AI, for example. Now in
yeah,
California, it's a big deal, right?
yeah,
Because there are dangers to AI and there needs to be regulations, right? So these kinds of, so you need, basically what I'm saying is you get the overarching law, right? Which should be international, which should be biblical, which should be Quranic. It should be God's law. But God's law, the problem with religious clergy is that they would see everything from, for example, thou shalt not kill. That's a law of God, okay? But if you like, for example, the Taliban, okay, you are, and you have a particular orientation, school of thought, or worldview that, let's say, might be repressive towards women. As an example, right? You would think that, oh, it's against God uh, for a woman's voice to be heard in public.
mm,
Any religious text that says that, but guess what? That's what you believe is God's law. So how good is that for society? Do you get what I'm saying?
yeah,
So, these are, that's why I'm not in favor of clerics uh, being given the last say on the issues of state, because they don't possess the mental capacity to view things broadly. They don't. Clerics don't. Okay, I come from clerics, so I know clerics don't. Clerics think about small things. You understand? How do you say your prayer in Latin Mass? Most of the time, they focused on these kinds of things. When your focus is very narrow on religious ritual and personal private life, you can't, your mind cannot comprehend the needs of society and governance. You can only have one focus. Either you focused on the narrow issues or you focused on the broader issues. You understand? Clerics in general focus on the narrow issues, which is why they tend to succumb to sectarianism, right? Because they still focused on the narrow issues. So if you, for example, a cleric, and you go to church and you belong to a certain sect, okay? You are maybe like an Eastern Orthodox, but you live in America, right? So you'll go to like try to find the best church that's relates to your church, and maybe you can't find the Eastern Orthodox, and then you'll see that they pray a bit different, and then you'll say, oh, but they pray wrong. You understand? Because that's
yeah,
kind of your focus works. You can't be in government. I'm sorry, my friend, you shouldn't be. Because next you would want to make all churches into Eastern Orthodox churches. Because only you know the right way of praying, for example. Get what I'm saying? And so this
yeah,
is kind of the with having clerics in government. But from a political perspective, from a governmental perspective, we can all understand the wisdom of the Ten Commandments, for example. Makes perfect sense. That's why most countries use it.
yeah.
in almost every country, murder is illegal. You understand? Nobody thinks
Is there
incest. You know what I
is
mean?
there a country that murder is legal?
Sometimes I think murder is legal in South Africa.
Wow.
It's illegal
Yeah.
on the books, but because it's so frequent, sometimes you wonder if, yeah, you know.
uh
Yeah.
no, everything you touched on, like me and Raj, we did a Twitter space on Saturday.
Mhm.
Lasted a pretty long time, man. One of the things that we brought up was about the voting process, like you're talking about. Maybe you're not necessarily talking about the voting process, but in order to participate in the voting process is what I brought up. I think you should have some type of education. Like if you can't understand how your government works, like if you don't understand how your voting system works, if you don't understand like the basic financial principles, if you don't understand how your country like makes its money, uh, if you don't understand like these concepts, you shouldn't participate in the voting process because then you're just voting on impression. Somebody whoever is impressing you the most, you don't really have your own opinion. You're voting on populism, or the most popular candidate, right? And one of the things that while you were talking that I thought about was like marriage, marriage particularly. So should marriage be separated from the state? We've had this conversation before. Well, the reason why marriage was brought into the law is because when people were getting divorced, like people were being dishonest, right? So they were brought in there to regulate
Mhm.
issues that were happening. So if somebody was getting a divorce, they would lie and they would not give what they were supposed to give to the woman or vice versa. So the government had to intervene. So now that I'm thinking about it, I think the more it's a complicated issue, man. Where do you draw the line? Because you want them involved so people do the right thing and you hold these people accountable for doing the right thing, but you don't want them deciding who can and can't get married. That should be a
Marriage
church state.
marriage is a particularly sore point, actually. It's the revealing point in why the church and state can't really be divided. Because marriage was for the longest time an institution before God, which took place in a church, right? And having a state regulator in marriage is antithetical to secularism. If you look at it that way, if you look at marriage as a religious institution, having a state marriage would be antithetical towards it. That's not separating church and state. Do you understand what I'm saying? So, yet the government has to have a marriage registry and system because they have to put the weight of the law behind uh, the court who resolves in marriage disputes. You understand? And so
Yep.
marriage is a very unique kind of issue where even in secular states they do kind of marry the church and the state. Because when you go to court, for example, they would want to know under which rights did you get married? Was it Christian rights or Muslim rights or Jew? Now they would take religion actually into consideration in the outcome of the decision that they're going to make. You find that in certain countries, even though they secular, they consider the secular state. When it comes to personal law, like uh, in South Africa, even, when it comes to personal law, they will actually include what your religion allows, or they would call it customary or whatnot. You know what I
Mm,
mean? But
yeah.
then it does become more complicated because now because first and the first sort of principle within secularism was to like confine religion to the private life of citizens, right? So you can follow whatever religion you want as long as it's in your private life, but you're not trying to impose it on the public by being visibly religious. That's sort of behind the banning of the hijab, for example. France has
Oh,
banned
gotcha.
the
Yeah.
from wearing the hijab because they're saying, look, this is a public display of religion. So we're not saying that you can't practice Islam. We're just saying you can't practice it publicly,
That's weird.
which makes it a very kind of a thorny issue because Muslim women believe that they should wear it. So now not wearing it is against their religion. You understand what I'm saying? So in these ways, these are the difficult waters between having a secular ideology, which is supposedly tolerant of religion, and then showing its intolerance of religion. Yeah.
I got a kind of a follow up with that. So there was a gentleman I worked with, ended up leaving, but was Muslim, and during Ramadan you're supposed to fast from sunrise to sunset, correct? That means no drinking, no eating at all, right? So anyway, he's at work, and this is one of the hottest times of the year, and he was devoted to his faith, obviously. So he gets called in for a random drug test, right? Well, he has nothing to give. Well, they tell him, well, you got to drink. Well, he says, well, it's against my religion. So now you're in this slippery slope that you get into, right? So I 100% understand it's against his religion. But what happens when the next person comes up? Well, it's against my religion too, and the person's actually a junkie. You know what I mean? Well, it's against my religion to pee right now. It gives them a 30 days to clean up or something or other, and so it like you're saying, like we keep coming to this conclusion. It's a complicated issue. You can't completely segregate the two. And anybody that thinks you could be a completely church state, we'll call it, or religious state, or just a secular state, I feel like what we come to the conclusion is that you have checks and balances in both. Both kind of keep each other in check. Like religion keeps us from straying too far from God, but then secularism, what we're calling it, keeps us from becoming like the Pharisees, I guess I would say, what the Bible would call Pharisees.
So I have an interesting question on freedom, and because I was going through the Kitab i Aqdas, which is the Baha'is like holy book, and it has like a bunch of rules and stuff. But it's interesting what Baha'u'llah said about liberty. So he said, liberty must, in the end, lead to sedition, whose flames none can quench. Thus warneth you he who is the reckoner, the all-knowing. Know ye that the embodiment of liberty and its symbol is the animal. That which beseemeth man is submission unto such restraints as will protect him from his own ignorance, and guard him against the harm of the mischief maker. Liberty causeth man to overstep the bounds of propriety, and to infringe on the dignity of his station. It debaseth him to the level of extreme depravity and wickedness. So, I mean, first of all, I'm interested to hear what you guys think of that, and Baha'u'llah's take on liberty, and then how, um, what implications do you think this concept has for America? Because America puts liberty as like one of its top values.
Well, first and foremost, I'd always say this: America has a skewed vision of what freedom is. Because I've had this conversation with you probably a dozen times now. Freedom is not free. Like it was literally a cost involved with it. So understanding that first and foremost, uh, it's oh, my daughter's crying. It's valuable because it gets rid of this sense of entitlement that we think we just deserve freedom because. So freedom's something that should be protected. And the law, the way we wrote our like constitution, it wasn't freedom to do whatever you want. Like you can't just go and say hurtful shit to people and oh, it's a free country. I can't say, hey Raj, I think you're you're a piece of shit, and I hope you know, I can't just defame your character. That's not freedom of speech. That's somebody just being an asshole. So Yeah, that's kind of like my take. Understand what freedom is first before we just preach about freedom, you know?
Mhm.
I think that the American philosophy is inherently flawed because to say that, like, for your highest sort of ambition to be, let's take, okay, life, of course, right? But liberty and the pursuit of happiness is hedonistic. In my opinion, to say that life is about the pursuit of happiness is hedonistic. You know? I think that life is about responsibility and sacrifice. And that would be a better goal, to have. Because what is the pursuit of happiness, especially when it's unchecked by the laws of God, right? So that means you are now free to break all the laws of God in the pursuit of happiness because this is your right, you know? And it doesn't actually benefit, that doesn't benefit anyone, it harms them. That's what Baha'u'llah is talking about, right? When you uh, have feel that your goal is just to be free and liberated constantly, uh, you will just follow your impulses, and
Hmm.
that pursuit of your impulses is actually going to harm what you are meant to be in this world, which is a being in touch with your spiritual self. Because the spirit is like something that is crusted over with rust. You got to polish it, to bring it out, and polishing it has to do with self control, has to do with following rules. But people don't like rules. I mean, the whole Americanism, the whole American way is to somehow be averse to having to follow rules, you know,
Mm.
and to view the establishment as evil because they want to impose and the rules, or the police are evil because they're trying to. I mean, this is absurd from a governmental perspective. It's absurd, but from an individualistic perspective, it creates people who are going to be clinically depressed in principle, you know, because they don't have a goal. They don't have, there's nothing that defines who they are aside from, oh, let's party and have fun. Let's look for the next entertainment. Let's look for the next, understand? And then obviously, the next thing is that you're going to be averse to like any sort of governmental authority. You're going to call it authoritarian when it's not necessarily authoritarian. It's just enforcing the rules of the country because you
Sure.
need it. You
Yeah.
understand? And that's
Yeah.
what happens. You can see that happening. What this BLM and all this kind of bullshit that was, it was just total chaos, and they just kind of let it happen. Just because, if they don't, then it's like, oh, now they're racist or whatnot. You know what I mean? But the point is, the laws should apply to everybody. That's kind of should be standard in any country. So that's kind of where that. So I think that the life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, the liberty and pursuit of happiness part is fundamental to the existence of the American, is inherently flawed as
Mm.
a.
I wonder, I often wonder when they wrote that what they exactly they meant by the pursuit of happiness. I've read a few things that they suggested, like what they meant was like attaining wealth or things of that nature. So I'm kind of curious to read something about that. Like what exactly? Because that was Thomas Jefferson that basically wrote that, right? If I'm not mistaken. So I'm curious, what was the logic behind it? What was the intent? Like, what do they mean specifically? Because if they did mean, hey, if I want to
Well,
go
I
get,
don't think I don't think they could have imagined that America would have gotten to where it is now. Because remember that you are talking about people who are inherently Christian in orientation, and people who read the Bible, and people who believed in the laws of God. So when they meant the pursuit of happiness, they didn't mean unfettered, anything goes. I don't think that's what they meant. I think they were coming from a society where too much was prescribed. and there was too much repression. You understand? Like, if you were born in a certain family, you'd be the underling of someone in a higher family, in a sort of a royal family, for the rest of your life. You'd not be able to go beyond that. You know, society was so divided. Stratification was so, like, clinical almost, that if you were amongst an oppressed group, that means you would be oppressed for generations. So America wanted to create a meritocracy where it didn't matter where you came from, you could rise to the top. And in many ways, I mean, I lived in America. In many ways, that has been true about America. I mean, look at Elon Musk. He came from South Africa, he came to America. Now he's the richest man in the world because he lives in America, because of the opportunities that America has afforded him. He would not have been able to do the same things in South Africa. So those are the positive spin-offs, in America. And when you say, oh, well, you can even say only in America, because those things don't happen. You don't have rags to riches stories very often in other places, you know, because America has tried to be a meritocracy. They have said, oh, you know what? It doesn't matter where you come from. Let's give you a chance.
America.
So, I mean, there are great things about America. It's not like I'm just like trying to, you know, um, you know, beat you guys down and
No.
be like, America is.
No. No.
Yeah. Yeah.
No. Because you're kind of leading me back to one of my points. I was saying was, like, people that read the Declaration of Independence today would read that and probably interpret like how you originally described it, as like a hedonistic reality. When the reality is the the nature of the people that actually wrote this, that wasn't like in their nature. Like, hedonism wasn't in their nature. They were checked still by their religion.
Mhm.
So we just keep getting back to this issue that you need both. You
I
can't
mean,
completely separate them both.
lived in, the thing that was appalling to me was that, like, in San Mateo, for example, okay, where Sheraj lives, right? Are you still in San Mateo?
Menlo Park,
Okay,
but
but in San Mateo,
close.
for example,
Hmm.
there were some beautiful churches that I saw, but they weren't operational, really. You know, I mean, for a long time there has been sort of a move away from religion, Christianity especially, you know. Um,
I hear it's making
and
a
I
comeback though. Like
nowadays,
recently, yeah.
I guess people are realizing that they've gone too far. People are
Mm.
saying, "Oh, holy shit! Did it? What happened? Yeah, did it get? Did we get to this point? So people are trying to make a comeback. But I mean, when I was there, it was almost like you couldn't even uh, like talk about Christianity publicly.
Mm.
It was so bad. I'll tell you one thing that happened at my school. We were studying the civil rights movement. Okay, Dr. Martin Luther King of the civil rights movement was reverend, right? I mean, that was his job. He was a reverend. And his friends, his cronies, were in the church. Those were his people, reverends. So we brought one of them. I don't know. Yeah, I think it was Reverend Shuttleworth or something like that. We brought him because he was still alive. He knew Dr. Martin Luther King and whatnot. So we brought him to speak at our school, right?
Oh.
And this was exciting for us because, like, we're gonna meet an actual civil rights hero and what, and
Activists.
it was really amazing. And we were right. So the guy comes and he says, "I just wanna say that if it wasn't for God, then we wouldn't have gotten this. God did this and God." After the guy was done and he left, people were complaining and said they didn't like that he spoke so much about God and the Bible. And I was like, you
Mm.
people are bloody idiots because this guy is a reverend. That's who he is. And this civil rights movement was on the basis of their perception of Christianity. They believed, from a Christian perspective, that racism was wrong. That was the impetus of the movement.
Hmm. Yeah,
You
absolutely.
can't separate Christianity from the movement run by a Christian reverend. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
They were offended, and then my lecturer, my teacher came. I think it was Dr. Lance. Wasn't a doctor actually. Teacher Lance, whatever you call him, Mr. Lance.
Professor.
He
Yeah.
came and they said, like, apologizing, oh, sorry for the, if we offended anyone by this guy's very strong, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, why should you have to apologize? I'm a Muslim, by the way. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
it would have cut no ice for me either way. Like, I don't care, right? If he wants to do that, it doesn't make a difference to me. But this guy was apologizing. Oh, if we offended anyone who's not Christian and who's a non-believer in God, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, why should you apologize?
Yep.
You know what I mean? And
Hmm.
that's
That's
kind
that.
of part. Yeah, exactly. You
Well,
know?
when we completely tried to separate the two, that's what you led to. Is that uh, having faith in your religion now is offensive to somebody, so you should apologize to that person because you're hurting their feelings. Like, irregardless if that person is advocating for something that's against your religion that you should follow and adhere to, but you should just fall in line because church and state should be completely separate. They got these trigger words they use here in the states. The latest one I've heard is called Christian nationalism, right?
Mhm.
And a woman defined it as oh, these are the Christians that believe that their rights actually come from God and not from the government. And we're like, isn't that the Declaration of Independence, right?
Mhm.
Like, our rights came from God. Like, these are unalienable rights that no man can take away from us. Um,
Mhm.
so yeah. It's a frustrating thing here that when we see what happens when you separate religion and state, we lead to I don't even know what to call it where we're at now, man. And Raj is more of an optimist than I am for the United States. He's always real super. Yeah, the United States is great. Now, don't get me wrong, I love the United States, but we're decaying from the inside out. Like, we're failing in everything, and I think it's because we've advocated complete separation of religion and state, and we lost those checks and balances.
Mhm. Mhm. And also, there's a problem with, I think Jordan Peterson might have brought it up, but one of the problems I think that a lot of societies, even South Africa and the United States and a lot of Western democracies like we have, um, we suffer from a multiculturalism that lacks a social cohesion and results in society disintegrating, you know, because we just kind of, uh, there's no um, there's no common denominator that underpins the society, and that makes it difficult to keep a nation together. Because nations, this is unnatural for nations. What we are experiencing is unnatural for nations. Okay, the way nations used to develop into a nation was usually you have like a tribe, okay, that have a whole bunch of people because they procreate more than the other tribes, so they become more powerful through more people, right? Then they establish their chief as king. Then their tribe with their king conquers all the other tribes, and then they have a nation. That's usually how a nation is formed. Okay, so there is tribal cohesion. Okay, because the tribes operate as tribes still. So there's tribal cohesion, right? There's usually religious cohesion because they're usually from one religion, you know, and there's often even ethnic cohesion, right? So then they retain some sort of identity because the way that the state was formed was sort of a natural way of forming. Um, I know people would hate me to say that war is natural, but it is natural to human beings, right? It's just now we have war on a much bigger scale. Before, people used to fight amongst villages and tribes. You know what I'm saying? But with the experiment of central government and democracies and multiculturalism, all those things are gone. You get what I'm saying? You don't have a tribe, you don't have a social cohesion, you don't have a group you identify with as being the in group for you. And that is difficult for human societies because we have evolved along tribalistic lines, whether we like it or not. And that's where these kinds of nationalistic, like white Christian nationalism, for example, is coming from. It's trying to go back to those tribal kind of origin, you know? It's like it's us and them. Like we are these people and they are those people. Understand? They bad, we good. This is kind of very basic tribal, you know?
Yeah.
Um, but humans tend to always go back to that. You know, it takes a unique level of education, of sort of multicultural training in a way, and being able to see nuance to manage a society that is diverse, culturally and religiously diverse. And America basically has failed, I think, in that at those levels, and that's why the society is disintegrating. It can work. I mean, I believe it can work, but it requires those things. Be able to see
Education.
nuance, education, you know, and things. And a lot of people are just not educated in America.
You hit it on the head. You hit it on the head. Education is 100% the biggest issue, and usually the loudest ones like that are screaming all over everything are like the ones that are most uneducated, and they sometimes, ironically, these people have like this is gonna sound like a paradox, but ironically, these people that are the most educated are the ones that have the highest level of education. So college has become a breeding ground, what I would say, for liberalism here in the United States, where they teach you not necessarily how to be a thinker, but how to like fall in line like a sheep. So on the flip side, a lot of people aren't educated as well. So the people who are educated have like a good vernacular, right? They know how to talk well. They can speak well. So when they go on the internet, you'll hear things like, well, you got to understand why we're in this financial system. It's because of the policies that Trump put in place. And you got somebody like me who's a high school educated, you know,
Mhm.
nobody that really doesn't, I actually learned by reading because I don't know, because I have to. And
Mhm.
well, tell me the policies that Trump put in place that got us to these points. Well, it's hard to explain to people that can't understand economic complexities. And that's their answer. Oh, so I'm too stupid, I'm too uneducated to understand, or is it just that you don't know the answer and you're just trying to shut people up because, you know? Which brings you back to the point. Regardless of your level of education, like I mean like an academic education. If you don't understand how your government functions first and foremost, I mean like how does your voting process work? Like, what's the difference between the House and the Senate? Who are your representatives? Who's your senator? Uh,
Oh, and
you know what I
about
mean?
the voting system, I mean, I think your guys' democracy is flawed because the electoral colleges system doesn't work. You just shift people around, you know, between states every time before the election to kind of win votes. You know what I'm saying?
Well, well,
So,
so to it, I'll agree with it to an extent because what I think is, I think like this, right? And this is no disrespect to Raj, and just give me a second, Raj. Let me explain. Because I don't want California deciding my election, okay?
mhm,
So if we go by the majority vote, like typically California's got, I don't know, maybe 15% of the population. You know what I mean? And you
mhm,
got these other big Democratic states that have like the majority of the population too. So why the electoral college was originally instituted was because like one state shouldn't decide. So what if 99% of people live in this state? They're going to decide what's best for everybody else too. You know what I mean?
mhm,
So they came up with a system where you got a point. It's like a game, right?
mhm,
You got to get more points than your opponent. And
mhm,
yeah, is it flawed? Yeah, obviously. But our whole election system is flawed right now. That could be a whole other topic. but we're kind of digressing on the religion and state, and I guess we keep coming back to the conclusion: you need both. What do you think,
Yeah,
Raj?
you see, for me, I mean, if I had to like invent a government, okay, for me, I would um, get the guys to sit together, uh, religious people, right? I would get like the uh, major branches of religion, like come together and say, okay, look, let us agree on what we believe is the overarching kind of uh, directive of God. Because we don't exactly know what it is, but let's try to agree on it. Okay. Let's discuss it and let's try to agree on it. Okay. So once we agree on that, I'll say, okay, what would we say in your scriptures are the rules that govern society? I'm not talking about religious rules. I'm not saying pray 5 times a day. How do you pray? I'm not talking about anything like that. You understand what I'm saying? The rules that govern society. I'll say, okay, let's enshrine that in a constitution. So
What?
we're not gonna call it Islam or Christianity or anything. We're gonna enshrine the actual rules in a constitution, right? And we're gonna say, okay, these cannot be vetoed or abrogated or cancelled or whatever, right? And then let the political system run its course. You know what I'm saying?
Well, I think also this. I don't think the government.
How I feel about it. If I had to like invent a state like from the start, from the scratch,
I also think like this. The government was never meant to basically control the state. It was like to operate, to facilitate, to keep the infrastructure going. You know what I mean? Not necessarily to come in and govern us. We were supposed to vote in our public officials, and we have elections that if they're not living up to what we like, we can vote them out and put somebody else in that will represent us better, right?
but something you
But
gotta
like you,
admit is that the failure of the society is actually the failure of religion, not the government. Just think about it this way, right? The government becomes more and more authoritarian because society gets more and more out of hand. Society gets more and more out of hand.
mm,
The upbringing of the parents and of the church and of its members in the society has not instilled in them the correct values.
that's a good point. That's
You
actually a
understand?
really good
Education
point.
kind of goes back to education again.
Yeah.
And it goes back to religious education. So, for
Hmm.
example, let's say the kids in America are raised all to believe that, okay, if you steal, that's wrong. God is not gonna look kindly upon you for stealing, for example. You know, if they are raised to believe, everyone to believe that the natural disposition of or mating system under God is a man and a woman, for example, or any number of things, they were raised to believe it, right? Then it wouldn't matter what the government considers lawful and unlawful regarding those issues. The society would be regulated by the beliefs it has. You understand? And so there is a failure of the church in that regard. In a predominantly Christian society like yours, right? There's a failing of the church. I mean, you got to admit that too, because before things come to the government, okay, it's first the will of the people, or a significant enough contingent of the population who wants that thing that you may, as a Christian, think is wrong. You know what I'm saying? So basically, Christianity has lost the argument, has lost the debate. The government is reflecting the values of a non-Christian people.
It's
You know?
obvious
And
we lost
and
the
I think that
debate,
kind of
bro.
goes back a little to the separation of church and state because um, public schools didn't they're not supposed to do religious education because they're not really
Mhm.
supposed to teach religion. So I think maybe that was kind of um, a bit of a pitfall, lack of spiritual education in the public school system.
Mhm.
I guess you
Definitely,
could teach,
definitely.
I guess you could teach like ethics or something like that, and then that's kind of similar. But it's different because the idea behind religion is believing in the unseen. But then with, you
Mm.
know, school or ethics, an ethics class, that's more logical memorization of, I don't know, behavior or something like that. So,
Mhm,
I, I,
mhm,
yeah, very
I,
different.
I think in every society we've seen the pendulum swing too far on each side, right? So liberalism, like in in full, is not a horrible thing, right? Like there's been some things that they've brought to light that were, slavery, right? It's a horrible thing. We shouldn't be enslaving people and treating them like they're not human beings, right? So liberalism brought that. But then liberalism is also telling us now, like you brought up, how Christianity has lost the debate. You're 100% right. And we beat this up every podcast probably, but I mean the trans argument is proving that, uh, we've lost that. We're literally challenging thousands of years. Actually, God's wisdom is infinite, but biblical principles, Jewish principles, scripture, let's just call it. It's thousands of years of wisdom, and all of a sudden we know more than everybody's known the last 1,000 years. And in certain aspects, obviously that makes sense, like in scientific aspects, like the discovery of atoms and things of that nature. But procreation has always been procreation. You can't do it without uh,
mhm.
male sexual reproductive organs and female sexual reproductive organs. But even saying that now is considered, it's getting on the verge where it's considered hate speech because you're a transphobe now. Well, I'm stating a fact. Two men cannot produce a child. Two women cannot produce a child.
Mhm.
And we're
I
talking.
firmly firmly believe that even in a secular country, um, when you look at things empirically or rationally with data, look, we are in a unique situation in our time where we can collect massive sums of data and analyze them. We could not do that before, you know? So when we look at data, for example, I think
Mm-hmm.
it's concluded that single mother homes produce more criminality than a home with two parents, with a man and a woman. Okay, they've even now looked into, for example, homes with two mothers. It's not actually that much better than a single mother home, for example. Another example, but we have the data's out there, right? Um, and so I think if we are not going the religious route, why don't we go the data-driven route? You know what I'm saying? So if we know that criminality is increased because of single mother homes, why don't we outlaw having children of wedlock?
Well,
I mean,
I
it would
mean,
make
one thing,
sense.
one thing is that, I mean, correlation doesn't imply causation. So,
Mm,
like that's the first rule of statistics. So there needs to be a causal relationship there. And then, I guess divorce, I mean, that is, I don't know. I think that's a little, um, extreme personally. But I think it's all about incentives. So like rather than outlawing it, you want to incentivize people to stay married or something like that. And there's already like a tax incentive to be married. Um,
Well,
but
there's also an incentive for a woman to have a child with a man and not be with him. The
to that
mm,
government
extent.
will. Yeah, the government will give you free housing. The government will give you free food. The government will give you everything you need as long as you're not with a man. Why is that? Why is
But
it that they'll give you everything you need, but you can't have a man with you?
Well,
Mhm.
so I
Because
mean, I can say just like the dark side of um being a woman and then getting a divorce is that if you're not the breadwinner, right, you get a divorce and then you're basically on the street. So the idea is like the woman tends to not be the breadwinner. So when they get divorced, they can be supported. I like that's the idea, but it kind of yeah, it's having yeah, go on, Matt.
well, that's also why we were talking about why you need religion there, right? Religion gives you that guideline, like what you're still supposed to support
Well,
that.
what I'm saying is that while it may be difficult to regulate sex, so for example, you can't tell people you can't regulate not having sex outside of marriage. No, nobody can really regulate that, right? But people choosing to have kids. I mean, in our advanced, uh, like scientific environment that we're in, with all kinds of contraception, whatnot, right? People choose often when they want to have kids and when they don't want to have kids, right? So people, we can make. I think it's feasible, like in a modern American environment, to make a law and say, look, you can't have children out of wedlock because you're not because you can't regulate sex. But I think that would improve the quality of the next generation.
I think you're
And
right,
also,
but how would you? I guess my first question is, what would be the punishment for that?
you could make up one, you know.
For
Um,
like
10
100,
years in
110
prison.
lashings, 110 lashings.
I mean, you have a I mean, uh, yeah, I think what's our punishment for that in Islam? 100
Yeah, what
lashes.
is it really?
100 lashes. That's really, yeah.
Damn, hey, that would wake people up. I'll tell you what, that would have woke me up.
Hey,
That fucking
can you see
110
people get
lashings.
lashings in Saudi Arabia?
I don't know. I don't
Oh,
know,
okay.
to be honest.
Mm.
But that's officially the punishment anyway. I mean, in the Quran, that's the punishment. But the point is that if people were more circumspect about who they're going to have a kid with, right? And they choose someone wisely in that way, that would create a better tomorrow, a better generation, and less crime in the society, you know?
I would agree. I would agree.
And things like that. And we know that basically. And I think that it's perfectly feasible in a secular modern society to make a rule like that, you know?
And I could see him. I can hear the feminists screaming at you now. You misogynistic. Uh, what are they gonna call you? All these trigger words. I can hear him. I can just hear him screaming at you
There's
now.
got to be some responsibility, and not only on there's got to be some responsibility on
You could
uh,
tax it
bringing
too. You could be like, oh, you had a child out of wedlock, so you're gonna get taxed at a higher rate or something. I don't know.
Or if you have a child out of wedlock, it's your responsibility to take care of the child and not the government's. And if you can't support a child,
yeah, but the thing about that is that you make the possibilities. I mean, the life of the child would become harder then, and it's not the child's fault for coming into the world without, you know, a father who
no, I
doesn't
get
know
it.
who.
I get it.
So,
All right,
so
or
that
a mother. I mean, you know.
but it's a burden on the tax system. Let's face it, it's a burden on the tax system. You have all these kids who don't know who their father is, being raised by the state, and the state is a terrible parent because most of them turn out to be delinquents. I mean, criminals, you know, drug addicts and gangsters. You know, so that's kind of the thing. I mean, that would be one step in the right direction. If we can't fix this generation, we should be fixing the next. You know,
No, I
so
What
get it.
about spiritual education? How do you see maybe spiritual education being implemented by a government or something?
yeah, I think the government can. teach uh, values that will help society, even if it's not invoking God. Like for example, in China, right? I mean, China is largely an atheistic state. Okay, they don't have nothing to do with God.
I thought they
I
were like
mean, in terms,
Buddhist in China, mainly Buddhist.
well, a lot of Buddhists are atheists. There's
Oh,
atheist Buddhism,
hmm.
right? China
I didn't know that.
tended to believe they tended to believe in the order of heaven without necessarily having to acknowledge God or a God.
Hmm.
So in that way, for example, Chinese women uh, are not uh, typically encouraged to sleep around. They still have to get married as virgins and all of that, but they don't necessarily invoke religion in the. Uh, it's it's a deeply culturally rooted, uh, ingrained and taught idea. You know what I
Sure.
mean? And the reason, and that was also a deeply culturally rooted idea in Western culture. It was normative in Western culture, but the narrative of freedom broke that normative idea. You know, because like, why shouldn't you just be allowed to sleep with whoever you want? That was what it was, right? Why shouldn't you? Because isn't that impeding your freedom to enjoy your life and explore and whatnot, right? Because it's one of the more difficult things to deal with in light of the idea of repression. Because what's the worst type of repression would be sexual repression, right? So, so one of the first things that went, I mean, in the secular experiment was sexual norms. Normative sexual behavior went out the door. Like sleeping around became more normative than waiting for marriage, etc. You know, because waiting for marriage means repression. There, there, there's that connotation to it, you know, sexual repression, and we against everything that is repressive, including that, you know. So that's kind of the thing we're dealing with. But I think one of the saving aspects of society would be, even if you can't tell people they can't have sex outside of marriage, I think that the technology is available for people to just at least have kids and get married first. I mean, like, look, in American culture, for example, you can live with your boyfriend, for example, for 5 years, and then now you guys say, look, you know what? I really want to have kids and settle down. Why not just get married first? Like, make it clear that you're in for the long haul, because that's not because of you, but that's what kids deserve. Because
Yep.
that's what the kids, you know what I mean?
Wait,
Yep.
what about the
Yep. Yep.
spiritual education bit though?
Oh, that's what I was meaning. I was meaning that as a secular state, you can't obviously impose a spiritual God-based education because you're a secular state, right? Because that now goes into religion. So which religion are you gonna? But you can uh, teach a type of spiritual education that emphasizes things like chastity, not not being hedonistic, not running after your pleasure, because there are provable ways of showing how that is bad without necessarily invoking the Bible or the Quran or God.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I
I
mean,
mean,
yeah, yeah. I was just gonna say that that's totally what I feel religion's about is we have this worldly world and the spirit world, but the worldly world is like basically evil, and so you should try and um bring the spirit like be in the spirit world and kind of bring it into the worldly world as much as you can, basically.
This sounds like the love versus lust conversation that somebody just had.
Yeah, no, I mean this is just kind of like the progression of my journey, so of my religious journey, and so I'm kind of like I see this element a lot, and the worldly world is like yeah, it relates a lot to the love and lust. The worldly world is lust, attachment to worldly things and stuff like that.
yeah, you gotta spiritualize the mundane, but the
Hmm.
spiritualized mundane in your ordinary life is a very individualistic pursuit. I don't think it can
Mm,
be legislated. And I don't think that is the business of government. In that way, I'm somewhat of a secularist,
mm.
you know?
Well, I'm not even saying like with government necessarily, but I'm just thinking in like how do you see like maybe spiritual education being pushed moving forward in this current world society we're living in? Like what's a way you can see it existing? Because I mean, I get
I
not in
think
public school, right? Because we're secular,
it's,
but
it,
how
does, it,
how
does
could it?
exist, it does exist in religious states.
Yeah.
Like, for example, Saudi Arabia, where Islam is the official religion, in every school they teach Islam, you know?
Mm.
But how to do that in a multicultural, multi-religious society? I don't think you can, because then it amounts to
I
uh,
mean, is there a
choosing.
private business or nonprofit solution to this you can see maybe?
Yes, yes, there is. I mean, I have tried to establish a nonprofit organization that does this.
Ah,
Not functional yet because I'm not in South Africa, but once I go back, that's going to be my focus, you know.
cool.
It's called Ondi, Organization for
Nice.
Non-Denominational Islam. And the goal of that is to focus on the core values that people within the Abrahamic religions agree on and promote those values. Because I think those are the values that are going to help societies moving forward. I don't have the outlook that um, societies need to embrace each other's religion. So, what I'm saying is that I'm not saying that everyone needs to become Muslim to have these core values when these core values do exist in other faith traditions. You understand? I'm saying keep your religion, coexist, right, on a common basis that you all understand. You know, I mean, people can choose to convert to religions they want, but the point is that society has to function, and we live in a multicultural, multi-religious world. That's the world we live in. It's not going to be different. It's not going to change. You know what I mean? But we do need a common basis. What is that common basis? And I
God,
can't,
or the
unfortunately, God, yes, God, and that's why I'm confining it to the Abrahamic religions, because at least we agree in principle who God is. I mean, it's something we can work with.
sure,
You
sure,
know,
sure, sure.
I mean, and I don't include other non-Abrahamic religions like Hinduism, for example, because there isn't a common. I can't identify the. You understand what I'm saying? But the majority of people belong to the Abrahamic faith tradition anyway. You know, and if they have a common core and they understand that people can choose to believe and choose to disbelieve, I reckon that the Hindus and everyone else should be all right. They'll be all right. You know what I mean? It's not going to be a problem. You know, it's just that they wouldn't be able to cooperate on the same level uh, in terms of the monotheist. It's a monotheistic aspect. You gotta you gotta find something. You know what I mean? And so you gotta work with what you can.
One thing though, like I feel like they are compatible because the gods in Hinduism are like expressions of the one God, but I think Hindus are down with the one God thing too. There's like one God, oneness, but then there's like several expressions. So I kind of like think of that as the names of God. Like you could have several names for God, and so these different gods are like names for God
Yes,
or something.
I mean that might have been the case originally, and that might be the perception of a very few people who are
Mm,
educated in that way. But the
mm,
vast majority of us uh, don't know much about religion to begin with, in that sense, where they sort of analyze it or try to understand it, and more or less just go along with whatever the customs
sure, sure,
are.
sure.
A lot of Hindus are actually just atheists. They're
Mm,
like, you know what, this is the customs that I'm familiar with, but I don't really believe in any of it. You
mm-hmm,
know?
sure. I can
Yeah.
see
So
that.
when you have like an atheist that doesn't believe in God whatsoever and think they don't have to adhere to any laws, I guess, God created, where do we end up at? You know what I mean? Where does that lead to? Like
Well,
you have
yeah,
that.
I guess if the atheist is able to organize themselves along the lines of hedonism and moral decay, it would probably eventually lead to war. To be honest with you, you know. But
Have we have we seen the state of the world?
yeah, yeah. I mean, it does lead to that in the end. But the point is that I think that's the nature of this world. It is good versus evil. And I think you got to try to make sure that you're on the side of good, and you got to try to avoid war and violence as much as possible. But eventually, violence will be done unto you. That's unfortunately what you see in the world. When you try to live right, when you try to do the right thing, I mean, you're gonna find that violence will be done unto you because your worldview and your lifestyle doesn't fit in with the narrative that they want to, in fact, impose on you. You know, and that's unfortunately the case because you got to realize that hedonism and a hedonistic lifestyle profits a few people. It profits an elite because that's how they make more
Yeah, they
money.
create.
That's
Yeah, they create
products. That's
consumers.
yes, consumerism.
Yeah, when you have people that can't restrict themselves like sexually, they actually they act on impulse, right? So they could they'll buy whatever you tell them to buy. They'll
Mhm.
whatever
I
the
mean, that's what
whatever the
I mean. That's what feminism was about to begin with, right? I mean, they discovered that if you bring women into the workforce, more women into the workforce, it drops the price of labor, right? So then you get double the
mm,
labor for the same money. You know what I'm saying? Because now everybody needs to work. Whereas when you only had the man working or predominantly men working, you had to pay the man a wage that he'd agree to. And he would only agree to a wage that's going to help him look after his entire family. So the men would sit there and be like, no, no way we're going to accept that wage, right? So then the companies would have to compete with each other to get the most lucrative workers who were men. So men had the sort of the say on what the minimum is that is acceptable, and they would only accept what could feed their families. But when women came to the working force, they saw their income as an auxiliary income. They weren't worried about whether it would feed their family, etc., because they had a man to do that, right? But then when the man comes to work the next day, they're like, oh, you know what? We're gonna pay you half, you know. And if
yeah, I've
you
never
object,
heard.
they'll say, oh well, then you're fired because there's 10 women out there waiting for your job. You know, will be happy to accept half the money because well, they just didn't have the same concerns back then. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
So it really is at the end the driving force behind a lot of the evil we see in the world is profit margin. The bottom to the you know yeah.
I think profit's good, but I think it's when you put profit over people, that's when you start screwing people over. But I think
well, that's what he.
profit just means you're taking more, you create more value than what you get in, which is good.
Well,
No.
that's
As
what
a
he was
profit as a
explaining.
proof of business, obviously that's what business is about, profit, right? Generating profit.
Yeah,
But that can't
yeah.
be the thing that guides society. And
Hmm.
that's unfortunately the world today, what's driving society is the profit margins of the major corporations, which are multinational and global. They are the government. It's not your government isn't the government. My government isn't the government. What because governments rely on funding. It's
I
who
guess
has
that's
the money
why
that's the
I guess
you know?
that's why I've always kind of been a fan of conscious capitalism, because I don't think profit is inherently a bad thing. I think it's a good thing because it just means you're creating more value than what you're getting. But it's it's the ethics. It's the like if you're putting profit before so conscious capitalism takes into account all stakeholders and tries to create win-win-win-win-win situations for everyone. That's the idea. So a lot of times businesses will do the win-lose situation where the business and stakeholders win, the the customer or the people population loses. But with conscious capitalism, you kind of take all stakeholders into account.
Yeah, but you see, that's not the job of the corporation or the owners of business. That should have been the job of the government to keep the ethics in check. Because as a business,
Mm,
look, as a
yeah.
business, my vision is on making the maximum profit for the least effort. That's my job.
I
So my
mean,
focus is going to
I
go on that.
yeah.
That I'm not going to keep that. Oh, this guy's marriage is going to break up because I, it's not going to be my concern. My concern is I want cheapest labor. You get what I'm saying? So, but the people whose job it is to keep me in check as the business owner and as being driven by profits is the government. That should have been the regulator. You get what I'm saying?
And yeah, and what did we
I
see the
I get that.
corporations do?
I think
I,
conscious capitalism the idea is that you create a business that actually is like many levels up off of that like maybe more traditional, morally more basic business that's going for profits no matter what. So I don't know. I think the idea is you create just a better business overall. So it actually lasts. It doesn't like, I don't know, die in a few years.
I think I think in a perfect world that it sounds great, but profit is still what drives the companies to exist, right? There's a thing called competition, and competition is actually good for the consumer because it drives uh, the price of the products that you need down, right? So what happened in the states is people, or not people, the government, like Mohammed actually just mentioned, they allowed these corporations to outsource their labor to like third world countries. So the competing companies that were within the country could no longer compete, right? Because
Mhm.
you're paying people, let's say you're paying somebody $25 an hour here when I could pay somebody in China, $2 an hour, and I could
Yeah,
produce
so
10 times the amount of products.
that's like normal standard capitalism business. So conscious capitalism would be like a company like Patagonia that does like some fair labor practices or I don't know exactly, but there are companies that practice conscious capitalism and it's actually it's like a selling point for investors.
Mhm.
Okay,
Mhm.
so are you a conscious capitalist consumer?
I I mean,
Probably not. Probably
kind of.
not. No, you'll probably go to Walmart over a store. You'll probably buy your groceries from a store that's cheaper than a store that's going to cost more.
I go to Whole
So all that
Foods
stuff.
sometimes.
Well,
Just get
if you
produce
were limited
though.
on a budget, well, if you were limited on a budget, you definitely prefer Walmart over Whole Foods, right? So all this
I don't
conscious
know. I don't know.
capital,
The quality of the food is like better.
if you can't
Yeah.
afford it, Raj, you're going to where you can go.
Yeah, but I
Oh
mean,
yeah.
when it comes to health, I mean, if you can't afford to keep your body healthy, you're actually costing yourself more in the long run.
Yeah. Well, if you
Yeah,
can't
yeah. So
afford
that
it, what
That's
can you do?
true.
that's
Isn't it?
That's true. But I
facts.
mean, yeah, produce is like reasonable.
All right, yeah. Well, we're on a small scale here now. Now you're talking about a company like what you say, Patagonia. I
But
believe they
Whole
do like
Foods also
backpacks.
practices the conscious capitalism stuff,
Yeah, and they
apparently.
appeal to ups. They
See, the
definitely
thing,
appeal to upscale people, right?
yes, people, yes, all the like the go green companies and all these kinds of things, they tend to be like twice the price, three times the price for their stuff, and you got to really believe in the cause, save the world and whatnot. to buy those things. But us normal people like me, I
Yeah.
got 10 kids, I'm not, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So the thing is, so what I'm saying is at the end of the day, the people, the state has to regulate the business practices within a country because
Yep.
individuals, I was a business owner, okay? I sit there, I look at my books at the end of the month and I say to myself, you know what? How can I make more money? Okay. Now the state regulator will come in and say, listen, you can't sell subpar products because it's against the regulations of the regulation board for this product. Okay. Somebody can't buy something, they're going to use it one time and then have to throw it away because it'll be broken. Right. So these are the regulations. This was the problem with China, by the way, in the beginning. Okay. They're producing more better things now because they have better regulations. But in the beginning, they had no regulations. They were undercutting the global market, right, with subpar products that would cost the consumer more in the end because they'd have to buy two, three of it. That's how they made it into the global economy, right? Now, obviously, because they got such a bad rap globally, we all said whenever anything breaks, we say, "Oh, it was made in China." That was like the kind of the
Yeah.
expectation, right? Anything
Yeah.
Chinese. But now China has improved its standards. They're actually making good stuff now, right? Because they realized that was not sustainable. But it worked to break into the economy, break into the market. So, but the job of that is maybe for the global market, they need a global sort of watch, a global standards bureau that involves uh, key players from all countries, manufacturing countries or whatnot. I don't know. I don't know how they're going to do it.
Well, with
That's
the
definitely
yeah, the back just on the conscious capitalism thing, like we got to think about the employees for a company, right? It's not just the employer. Employees take advantage of the benefits they have as well. So, how often do we see FMLA, the Family Medical Leave Act, abused here in the United States, where people you can't punish them because they got some mental uh, mental issues that they need time off. And back to what your brother was talking about was, if you're a business owner, I don't give a shit about your mental health, man. I'm trying to run a business here. So
Mhm.
if I cared about everybody's mental health, if everybody just broke down when the business fails, you know what I mean? So I'm not
Mhm.
necessarily bought into this conscious capitalism. I think that's more along the lines of like it works for like niche products, like Patagonia, or like he said, go green, like where people actually made in the USA. Like that's another thing, you can buy a T-shirt that costs $65 because it was made in the USA, and I can buy the same exact T-shirt on Amazon for $19.
Mhm.
Personally, I'm gonna buy the T-shirt on Amazon because I don't believe in that product that good. So back to
Mhm.
what he was saying is the government needs to regulate these corporations and prevent them from. We should have kept all our business here in the United States. We should have never let it leave. Then we all be competing with other U.S. companies versus like uh, cheaper labor versus U.S. labor.
And you could compete globally eventually, because you could say that okay, our product is superior in quality, because I mean a lot of the competing products that were coming out of China to begin with were inferior, you know. So I mean there's that. I mean back to the topic, state versus religion. As you can see, I mean the separation of the church and state. I mean it's yes, it's a complex issue, you know. But I think that finally, I mean, my concluding remarks on the issue is that the law of God is the law of God and it must reign supreme. That's my take on it. And I don't think the law of God is religion specific. I think that by and large, religion in general agrees on what is morally good, and it is enshrined in revelation. And I think that the revelations by and large agree on what those things are. What I don't think can be regulated or controlled or governed is belief in God or belief in a religion. because that has to come from you. You know, nobody can tell you which religion to believe in, or to believe in God or not to believe in God. I mean, people can encourage you, try to convince you, but it can't be regular. You know what I'm saying? It's not
Yep.
for the not the state. So that's kind of my take on the whole issue.
I like the conversation personally. The way you worded it actually made me realize what I thought. It didn't change my thought. It brought more clarity to me that it is a complex issue, and in a nutshell, yeah, you need both. You got to have checks and balances. You can't have an extreme. We see religious states become extreme, and when we see secularist states become extreme as well. So if you don't have those checks and balances to keep each other in check, you wind up just the pendulum swinging. So somehow we got to keep that in the middle. And I think the way you brought it up was having basic God's laws that are actually beneficial for the entire population, and these are our standard. And then we have also other laws, like you said, that we're constantly evolving. Like you just brought up the example about AI. You know, obviously there's going to be some one-offs that we always got to constantly evolve. But as far as our morality, this is where we stand. And I think society would be better off.
Mhm. Awesome. Well,
Yeah,
what is your thought? Yeah?
yeah, I think there's yeah, I mean, I guess at the end of the day, um it is really complicated, and so it's hard to um I don't know, really come to any conclusions on what's best really, but I think the secular system we have, it makes it I think it's worked decently well, and I think the freedom of religion in the United States has been a key part of its flourishing. Um, and I think reason I think a secular government that's not formally religious is okay is because in religions it actually um, it encourages like listening to the government as an authority and
Mhm.
obedience basically. And so yeah, I think having a secular government founded on godly principles, yeah, it kind of makes sense. Kind of what we have in the US right now. I think yeah, I think it kind of works. I think we had an interesting point with the pursuit of um, happiness and liberty, but yeah, I think I think yeah, God-centered rules is the key. Uh, yeah. You
Okay,
need
awesome.
God's stamp of approval so you can get
Hmm.
it going.
Hmm. Awesome.
All right. Well,
Man, it was
thanks for
good.
a great conversation, guys.
Good. Really
Do you
good.
guys, does anyone want to close it out with a prayer?
You go ahead. I'm enjoying the ones you are reading. You know, it's
Yeah.
new, it's different.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
Heck yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's go with justice. I beseech thee, O my God, by all the transcendent glory of thy name, to clothe thy loved ones in the robe of justice, and to illuminate their beings with the light of trustworthiness. Thou art the one that hath power to do as he pleaseth, and who holdeth within his grasp the reins of all things, visible and invisible. Baha'u'llah.
I think that that guy was a Muslim man.
They were, yeah, they came out of Islam.
The prayers are exactly like
They're
the Muslim
Arabic.
prayer.
Yeah.
Oh, the exhortations, the way that it's done, it's very Muslim. Yeah,
Yeah, no, it's very, very Muslim. Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
yeah. But I like the way that they translated. The language is good. It's
Yeah,
actually nice.
I like it too. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, guys, thank you for the discussion. I gotta go.
All
All
right.
right, man.
Matthew, was nice.
Hopefully y'all will link up again next week, man. Inshallah.
Inshallah.
Inshallah. Okay.
Peace.